This is an old 1871 photo showing the Mi'kmaq people who had an early settlement in the area of Turfs Cove, located on the Dartmouth side of Halifax Harbour, Nova Scotia. This cove was originally named by the Mi'kmaq as Turtles Cove. And we know that the land of the Mi'kmaq, in particular, we're focusing on Nova Scotia, Canada. And of course they lived in various other locations in the maritime provinces. But today we're just focused in on Nova Scotia. I discovered a number of years ago that in the oral tradition of the Mi'kmaq, that is known to us today as the Algonquin legends, the Mi'kmaq legends, these were wrote down and recorded in the 1800s by a couple of well-known people who were involved in and interested in the lives and times of the Mi'kmaq. And I discovered a number of years ago that they recognize Glooscap as being in the Orion Constellation. For a starter, we'll just go to Google Earth here, and we'll take you down to Nova Scotia. Amazing, isn't what we can do in this modern world? But also, at times, it's even more amazing to know what the Mi'kmaq were able to do in ancient times. And here's Nova Scotia. This is where I lived here in Truro, Nova Scotia, and I was born in Tatamagouche, Nova Scotia, over here, general area. When I lived in Bedford, Nova Scotia, I served on the Bedford Barons Technical Advisory Committee between 1990 and 1992, and this resulted in the preservation or protection of the two Mi'kmaq petroglyphs in the Bedford Barons area of Halifax County. And this is the general location they are in, up here off of Emerson Drive. We can only get so close, but it would be on the ledge. This is the Barrens. This is a rocky outcrop where the earth had buckled 500 to 600 million years ago when the ocean bottom was lifted up to the surface. And this similar type of rock is here, but you cannot see it. When you do walk along, you come out here on the ledge here, it's showing a bit. So I was very pleased. That's a protected area now, and a lot has been said about those carvings, the 8-pointed star and the other one. It's gotten a lot of public attention, which is great. And Turfs Cove would have been down, here's Dartmouth here. So, and then McNabb's Island. It's great to have a little connection with my last name, but there's a different history that's involved with the island. But we won't go into that today. And of course over here is Oak Island, Nova Scotia. We're just going to take a close look at this. And once again, a lot of attention has been given to the Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia because of this more than 200-year treasure hunt that's taken place, and on Oak Island. Up here we can go north. This line, this is the longitude line going north, and this is going south. And I just have it marked here on a special boulder in the Turtles Cove area. And but that's going to be for another day. the reason why we're looking at Oak Island is because I want to show you too where the Kejimkujik lakes are. The Keji Lake. That's a short way of saying it. And this is it here. And a lot of stone carvings were discovered there and traced in the 1800s by a postmaster who became interested in this area, and he traced about several hundred petroglyphs that were carved by the Mi'kmaq, and outsiders too, foreigners, the English, the French. Well, it's quite an interesting formation of islands here, isn't it? I got to take a closer look at them later on, but that's not for today. I just wanted to get you aware of where petroglyphs are carved, and some of these petroglyphs represent the Orion Constellation. And on another video I'm going to show some of these tracings to you and explain some of the details. But now I'd like to read my decipherment of the Mi'kmaq petroglyphs, or not petroglyphs, but legend, known as Glooscap, as I've titled it, and the Orion Constellation. So we'll just take a look here too, and I'll put this location where you can view this wonderful presentation of the Orion Constellation. I'll put this below this video later so that you'll be able to go there. There's been a lot of talk about the Orion Constellation over the years, the last few years more so. We all know that the universe is expanding outward, and because of that, the stars are moving. So over thousands and thousands of years, the constellations take on a different shape. Eventually, the Orion Constellation will not be this shape, but that's a long time off in the future. We have some dates here that you can look at: the AD time period and the BC time period. And notice how the bow of the Orion Constellation has changed over these massive periods of time. This is all computerized and figured out scientifically and based on fact. The shape of Orion doesn't change that much over these periods of time up here in the right hand corner. The arm here that's been known to hold a club and different objects depending on what peoples were viewing this constellation over the ages. The Mi'kmaq also viewed the Orion Constellation as Glooscap. So what I'm going to do now is, and this was a discovery I made, I don't recall ever reading anyone else bringing this out, but here's what is said, and I'll try to break it down where it's being mentioned in the tradition or in the legend, and then where I'm making a decipherment. It says, Glooscap taught the Mi'kmaq the names of the stars. So whenever Glooscap came into the land of Nova Scotia, he was a cultural hero chief of the Mi'kmaq, believed to have been living in the Cape Breton area, and his friend, often referred to as his younger brother, was Martin. I'm not going to get into all the issues surrounding Glooscap that have been tossed around over the years. I'm comfortable with Glooscap being the spiritual leader of the Mi'kmaq. Then the legend goes on to mention the hunter, who I'm pinpointing as Glooscap in this legend, holds his bow. So here's Glooscap, and here's the bow he's holding. It's interesting, as the stars change, it's almost like a bow string being pulled and an arrow going to be shot out. So that's what's being held here by Glooscap, is a bow. He had two canine dogs. Their names were Loon and Humu. So he had two dogs. loon is represented by the constellation Canis Minor, known as the lesser dog. They're not showing them in this particular short video, but another time I will point them out. They're at Glooscap's feet, and the other one, Cumu, is represented by the constellation Canis Major, Sirius, the dog star. So another time, once again, we'll go into that. And they're at Glooscap's feet, canine dogs. Glooscap wore a belt, which would be the 3 stars in the Orion constellation right here. And it mentions that Glooscap had 3 daughters, so these would be representations of the 3 daughters here. It's interesting, the Iroquois people of North America referred to these as the 3 sisters, and they actually named them. This is not necessarily the ones that, which ones they picked out, but they were named corn, beans, and squash. So it's interesting, isn't it, when we look at various different views of Glooscap. But in this case, Glooscap had 3 daughters, as recorded by the Mi'kmaq oral tradition. Now, the mentions in this legend, and I've shortened this legend up a lot. There's more to it, but because of time, we can't go into all the details. But it's mentioned the cavern of the darkness. So the Mi'kmaq were very much aware of the universe. The cavern of the darkness, we can see the darkness here, the dark matter, we could call it, if we want to. They referred to that cavern of the darkness, so that was the universe. And then the Milky River, as they referred to it, not shown here. This Milky River, as we can all appreciate, is the Milky Way. And Glooscap was known to go down the Milky Way, or the Milky River, in his canoe with Martin, his younger brother, and his mother, and there's other aspects of that, and his dog were on this canoe. But we'll go into that another time. So to finalize this subject, it mentions once again in the legend, Glooscap had 7 neighbors. These 7 neighbors would be the Pleiades cluster of stars. There are 7 stars in that group. They were also known by other native people of North America as the 7 sisters or 7 brothers. And of course the early explorers called them the sailors' stars. I think that was one of the words they used. But they could guide their ships along the coast of Nova Scotia because of the location of that cluster of stars. So I think that's going to pretty well do it. We can go back to Google Earth. And I hope you appreciate this. It's just amazing, isn't it? The advancement we have in technology today is just incredible. So, once again, Nova Scotia. The Mi'kmaq were known to go over to Newfoundland. They had their canoes. They'd go across here. And they would set fires somehow on maybe smaller canoes or whatever means they had. I guess there may be several canoes, but they could follow this string of fires on these canoes to safely go from this area, Cape Breton, I believe it's Cape North, and over to Cape Ray, Newfoundland. And the Betuk native people lived here in Newfoundland. We're not going to get into all the issues of who did what and when and how. Cape Breton Island is here, and this is where Glooscap and his younger brother Martin were claimed to lived. And there's a lot of history to Cape Breton Island. Then we can go down to, of course, up here to Prince Edward Island. And the Mi'kmaq were well known in New Brunswick. And the Algonquin people went all the way down through the New England states. And these legends, the oral tradition, were derived from these various people. And the Maliseet mainly lived here in St. John area of Newfoundland, or not Newfoundland, but New Brunswick, and this, general area. And they worked in harmony with the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. So I think that's pretty well going to do it. I'm going to return to this subject again and explain some other very interesting things about the Mi'kmaq and the Penobscot natives in this particular area of Penobscot, Maine. And so we'll leave it at that for today.